Joining us on the broadcast to sort of figure out why, Jitarth Bhardwaj is with us, Daniel Bodman, he is a senior correspondent for the National Telegraph, Ambassador Basid Mukerji, she served for 4 decades in India's Foreign Service, and we have Keith Vaz, many of you will recognize him. He's been a long-standing, now former Member of Parliament from the UK. Mr. Vaz, let me take an opportunity. What is your assessment, in your personal opinion, about what took place in Palgam in India 3 days ago?
Good afternoon, Rishwa. Thank you very much for inviting me on this program. It's very clearly an act of terrorism. And I want to say how much I appreciate the time and effort that you put into the analysis that you made, the way in which different acts of terrorism are covered by the media in different parts of the world. I think what you're trying to say is that there may be a common agenda in certain areas of the media to portray something like this as not being terrorist. But as we know today, the US House of Representatives Foreign Affairs Committee, one of the most powerful committees in America, have produced a report in which they have done what you have done. You've done it much more subtly and with much more eloquence, if I may say so. But they have directly attacked the way in which the New York Times has portrayed the atrocities, the terrorist atrocities that occurred in Palgam. Because we all know, we've suffered it ourselves in Northern Ireland quite recently, that these are acts of terrorism and they can only be described as such. I think I'd like to separate the way in which the media has portrayed them from what actually happened. I don't think that we should bother. It's irritating, it's annoying, it's wrong for them to portray it in the way in which they have. I agree with you entirely. But I think what's more important is to see the consequences of what has happened amongst the political establishment in the world. There has rightly been absolute condemnation from the leaders of the world about what has happened. Of course, people are taking sides. Politics is a tribal game. And therefore, if you support a particular country, you tend to not describe what happened as an act of terrorism. But I think we should go beyond that. And irrespective of which tribe you belong to, you should be very clear when innocent people are subjected to acts of violence and murder by others in this way, it is an act of terrorism and people suffer the consequences.
Okay.
And, the sights we saw were very moving, but the consequences remain the same. This is terrorism, and we need to unite together to make sure that we deal with those involved in terrorist acts.
So let me put on record, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, Foreign Secretary David Lammy, both have called this a cowardly act of terrorism. It is what it is. And let me describe to you what it is. Groups of people were sitting in a green meadow, families with children, newly married couples, where they were approached by individuals carrying automatic rifles. They were asked their names. Upon providing their names, they were asked for identity cards. Those who did not have identity cards were stripped naked, the men, to check if they were circumcised or not, to identify them as Hindus, after which they were shot in the head and their wives were told, go tell Modi, who happens to be India's Prime Minister. Now, if that is not an act of terrorism, forgive me, my
Absolutely.
definition would struggle. So, the British establishment, of course, not for the first time, has taken a different position from what the reportage is. But Mr. Vaz, obviously you can relate to the irritation, but for many people who are going to be reading a version of events as published in their nearest and dearest publication, newscaster, their version of events will be completely different to what I have just elucidated. And that does matter.
It does. It certainly matters. You're absolutely right, Rishba. It does matter. And you are right to call people out. If we don't call people out, and if a journalist doesn't call out another journalist in the same way as a politician would call out another politician, then we would allow this to be accepted. Silence would in some way denote consent. But you have been very clear. I'm still very shocked and moved by the description that you've just given as to what happened. There are elements of this that I had not heard before from looking at the mainstream media. But you are absolutely right to call it out. But we shouldn't look for validation from British politicians necessarily, such as Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary. I think they're right to say what they've said. We should look at the court of public opinion and what ordinary and decent people would regard as being acceptable and not acceptable. And ordinary and decent people all over the world, whoever they are, whichever religion they follow, should accept that these are acts of terrorism, not just as described by you, but as to what actually happened and the eyewitness accounts that we've heard. And calling it out is a very important act of free speech and democracy, which is what you've just done just now.
But Mr. Vaz, we are now getting to 24 years since we've been dealing with active terror zones since 9/11. And I mean, it is emblazoned in our memories. None of us will forget till our last day. It's unforgettable. 24 years later, we still are at it between your terrorist or my terrorist, or good terror or bad terror. Does it end in our lifetimes?
Well, it'll only end if the governments from where these people came from take ownership of the problem and are equally forceful in not just condemning what has happened, but also using their time and resources to work with the victim country and the victims of these acts of terrorism in order to track down and find those responsible. This is not something only India can do. All other neighboring countries, that obviously includes Pakistan and other countries, should be acting with the Indian government, using their time, resources, the intelligence community they have, in order to work with the government in order to find out who these perpetrators were. It's not enough for it just to be seen as a problem for India or India as the victim. It's got to be that other countries need to work with India through international organizations and make sure that something is done. Obviously, the UN has also condemned what is going on and what has happened as acts of terrorism. This is welcome, but more needs to be done. Condemnation is easy. Where it really counts is using resources, time, effort, and networks to hunt people down who are responsible for these heinous acts.
Mr. Vaz, I'll tell you what the issue is. The issue is that if something happens in London or it happens in New York, which is something horrible, we see an invasion of Afghanistan, an invasion of Iraq, we see presentations of WMDs being made at the United Nations, which may or may not have turned out to be correct. We see all sorts of action that take place. We heard statements that you are either with us or against us, that there operates in this world an axis of evil. And yet here we are today being able to introspect that perhaps we have to do this on our own. Now, things are a bit stretched here. You're probably aware that Pakistani nationals have all been asked to leave the country. I've been told that the Home Minister of this country is taking hourly reports on their repatriation. Our armed forces are on high alert. I don't know what's going to happen. The Pakistan government has yesterday suspended the Shimla Accord. I don't know what that means, because that led to the creation of Bangladesh. It's a confusing time, let alone for somebody observing it from where you are. this is going to be a difficult few weeks, sir. Does India have the right to defend itself?
Of course, India has that right, and all countries have the right to take whatever action that they need to take in order to defend themselves from terrorism. There's always going to be consequences for acts of this kind. And the best way to avoid this happening is to, first of all, this is India. It's happening in India. It's happened to India. But other international organizations and countries should be able to help and assist through their intelligence communities to try and find out what's happening. You know, after all, we can put people on the moon and beyond. We know what's happening on different planets once we do these things. So the technology exists. It's no good us talking about, I know your previous segment was about AI and other issues of that kind. We have the capacities to find this out very quickly if others help us do this. And we should make sure all countries should be part of this. And those countries that support terrorism in any form need to become pariah states. They should not be allowed to continue to do this. Now, we don't know everything that happened. We don't know everything that occurred in the run-up to what has happened. But of course the country needs to take any action that it wants in order to defend itself, and it's right to do so.
I have a final question because I know we have limited time with you, but most of us sitting here in India, sir, under President Barack Obama, a covert operation was undertaken by a Navy SEAL team to enter the sovereign airspace of Pakistan, land on Pakistani soil, and undertake an operation that eliminated Osama bin Laden. And he was recognizably by everyone all over the world a terrorist. Now, we would have thought that by that episode itself, there would be consensus that Pakistan is harboring terrorism, but that has eluded us. Why is that?
I have no idea why that is. I just think that one should act speedily and with great passion, but also understanding the consequences of the decisions that have taken place. I think it's very important that we keep focused. There is so much happening in the world. Rishba, you know this. You are a very distinguished journalist, one of the most distinguished journalists in the whole of India. You know from your telephone, from your phone, that things change every single minute. And what we need to make sure is, even though other stories will happen all over the world, we remain focused on this issue, because it is so unusual that India, a country that does not interfere in the activities of other nations, there are many countries in the world, including those who sit on the Security Council, who've made a history of interfering in the activities of other countries. India has never done that. And it is a victim in this particular circumstance. We need to make sure that you carry on and do what you have to do. But countries like Britain, with a huge Indian diaspora, who are utterly shocked at what has happened, and not just the Indian diaspora, those who go for tourism purposes to India, whether it's to Kashmir or to my old home state of Goa, want to feel that they are safe. So the whole world has an interest in helping India find out exactly what has happened and punish those responsible and punish any organization that has supported them in what they have done. That's what has to happen in the future.
I appreciate the sincerity and the gravitas of your words. And as always, Keith Vaz, thank you for having this conversation in what are, of course, tense and difficult times for us in this part of the world. Keith Vaz joining us from the UK.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.